Now this video is going to be dedicated to restoring a Ducati track bike seat for Glenn. This is a part he was going to use on his one of his first track bikes, and we used it as an example of how to make a real track day seat where you use closed cell foam. And on this video I'm going to show how to make the correct patterns, how to adjust the patterns, and how to install that with contact cement. And it does allow you to sit a little bit lower on the bike if you're willing to obviously trade away some of the comfort. I'm not sure you would want to do this to a street bike, but over the years I've done it to many of my race bikes back in the 70s using closed cell foam. It works real well. But first we got to refinish the part, and that's a tremendous job, and Glenn did most of it himself. Now, I do remember when Glenn got his first Ducati track bike, and it wasn't, we did so much body work on it, it was unbelievable, but it came out great. Even with the stickers and with all of the red paint. I think Glenn bought gallons of red paint in the beginning. And we had to do this seat. We wanted to make a real track day seat now, not just a, I guess you would call it the replacement seat that comes with the bike or anything. So this was one of the things that it got a little tricky, and I thought this would be some good information to share. Now you'll notice I was shooting most of the video. Glenn was doing most of the work. He had been working at my house a couple of years, I think, that we were working together on doing projects, A-team projects for each other, for other people, did some wheels for Vince, if I remember right, different projects. But it was like an A-team labor of love. Now, I really, to be honest, if this were a real street bike, I would have primed it, sanded it, primed it, and done a little bit more work on the prep of it. But what Glenn did instead, and there's nothing wrong with doing it this way, it just use up a lot more paint. He actually put on coats of red, block sanded them down, put more red on, block sanded it down. Now, I'm not sure that's the easiest way to do it, and he got my tripod painted a nice color of red in the process. So, but anyway, we did use, back in this time, we used a lot of red paint on this Ducati, but it did come out real nice. And this is just the seat. There were other projects, the fairing parts and whatever, but now he put on plenty. You can use it, actually, you can use it as like a filler almost if you put enough on. And because we were working here in the summer, of course it dries right up with no problem at all. It actually dried pretty shiny, in fact, but there were still flaws in it, and it still had to be wet sanded out. And you want to do this, you want to get the finish on this right before you start making the rubber parts, because once you make the rubber part, it's going to be real difficult to do anything, buffing it out or anything. And you kind of get the horse ahead of the cart here. But getting the red on, and plenty of it, so that it could be wet sanded down, that was really the first part of this job. And it really, because we were doing this in the middle of the summer, and I normally wouldn't be working in the middle of the summer. That's the issue. So this paint dried up real quick, but of course, as soon as it dries, you see spots you want to work on, you want to fine tune it up. And to Glenn's credit, he got to be as fussy as I am at the end of this, and he was an excellent student learning how to paint these things. And of course, most of learning how to paint is really like mixing concrete. It's just a lot of work. And if anybody points you in the right direction, it's only a matter of a day or so and you're doing professional grade work. But it is a lot of dirty work, and this is not the kind of thing you can just get a backhoe and dig a hole. You got to dig a hole with a shovel here. So anyway, my opinion is the way this, and because it was a track bike, and if I remember right, maybe I don't, this bike had already been crashed, and there was other body work on it, and we started out with a pretty rough piece of equipment. But again, to Glenn's credit, being fussy, and what happens when you start doing nice work? You get fussier and fussier. You say, yeah, a little spot there, a little spot here, and you don't want it to be sloppy now. And luckily, I might be exaggerating. This might have been 3 or 4 coats of red paint before they ever put the clear on it. But all of it combined, the bottom line is we got it to this point, and that's where it has to be. And it's certainly the part that you actually sit on, you didn't have to worry about that. It's just that back piece. And because this is a track bike piece, it doesn't have the hole in the back for the tail light. That had already been bondoed in and filled in. All that was done. I had a roll of closed cell foam. It's called closed cell foam. From back in the day of making seats for Luciano, we made seats for our RDs and TZs. The closed cell foam was the way to do it. Obviously, for a street bike, might not be the most comfortable thing in the world, but when you're doing 20-minute track day sessions, or in the case of a race bike, you want to eliminate every ounce of weight you can. Back in the day, all the bikes had that, and even the bikes that went for the long races like Daytona. So anyway, but no matter what, it's a lot of wet sanding and a lot of, this is 2000 grit on, I think, on the first coat of clear. And again, this is what I liked about working with Glenn. He was an excellent student, of course. He had a lot of energy, and to be honest, he had more energy than I did. And he brought over his Adams refinishing system. And at this point, we weren't going to buff it out, I don't think. Yeah, let's buff it out. So, when you have somebody else doing all the work, it's easy to say that. So I said, yeah, let's buff it out, and then we'll make the pattern for this. Now, up to this point, you can see there's still some spots have to be buffed, and you have to really make sure it's cleaned, and all the wax, if you did wax it or polish it, it's got to be perfectly clean before you do the next step. And the way this worked out, at this point, you could have sold this for a brand new part, even though this had been, I think a used part, but I'm not really sure. And there still was some things. Yeah, well, let's make it perfect. Well, once we get it perfect, now we got to get a center line. Everything that you do on a job like this works off a center line. So I carefully measured to get a center line on this, and I was showing Glenn how I would have done this job if it were one of my Yamahas, and make a rough outline pattern in tape. Now you can see roughly, this is a rough, and always make the pattern oversized. Never make it undersized, or make it that you can't trim it. And make sure you have plenty of foam rubber. When you cut the foam rubber, cut it oversized. That's the whole thing with any of these kind of jobs, is make the pattern bigger than it has to be, and then little by little shrink it, adjust it, fine tune it, whatever you want to call it. But working off a center line is the way to do this. Now, I know this from designing model planes for 30 years. This method, and Les Demet is the one that taught it to me, and this works so good. Now you take a piece of paper and make a half pattern. You don't want to make a full pattern. I want to make a half pattern, because when I'm done with that, then I can make a bigger piece of paper. I can tape pieces of paper together, and I can use that as I'll just use the word mirror image, but watch what happens here. This is like model airplane or machine shop technology. I want half of the part. Now, when I cut that out and I trace it on a bigger piece of paper, using that for a center line, both sides will be exactly the same. And so rather than try to make two, which is a total curve, I get one side and I can fine tune that now. It's oversized, fine tune it, work on it, shave it down, whatever. You use the scissor. This is why in model airplanes, this is called paper dolls. You make paper dolls. Trim that edge a little bit, trim this edge. And what happens, I want to have one half of the part, because then I can transpose that onto a much bigger sheet of paper, flip it over, and I've got, with the paper folded, I can even do it in one stroke of the pen just by folding the paper. And that is really a nice way, a very efficient way. Now this paper is folded. I'm tracing out the half of it. Just tape several pieces together, since it's not really high tech. Once it's folded together, you trace half of it on there, and this is a really good way to do it. Whether you work in a machine shop or you work for in aviation stuff like I do, this, once you trim that out, you've got a symmetrical left and a right, and it's all in one piece now because we worked off the fold. And once I unfold that, it's a little bit oversized now. There I have my perfect pattern. So now from that point, I want to cut a piece of rubber oversized. And this is where it gets a little tricky. You just have to use that pattern that you just made and add on, I call it the thickness of a pen, the thickness of a Sharpie marker. Because this material, we can use, number one, a grindstone or a little sanding tool in a drill press to kind of fine tune it and shave it. And the saw makes an absolute perfect cut on this. Either way, no matter how you do it, now the belt sander will take it. But the trick that makes this practical is to make the pattern oversized and then make this a little oversized. Because once you make the part too small, it's not going to work out exactly the way you wanted. But for this piece, now, this is just a rough fit. And looking at it, it's symmetrical. And that's important because if you try to draw that by eye, it's really difficult. It looks easy when somebody else does it. Now, we see it's oversized. Where are we going to trim it back? And this is, I asked Glenn for his opinion, my opinion. What usually works real well, because you can't really hold it any practical way unless you have a helper like this. You can use some, and I showed Glenn how I would do it, use some green tape. And we know this is, of course, we're fine tuning the pattern down now. But up in the front here, we have to take into account this part has to slope down. And I think there was some little bolt holes or something up in the front here. But it gets trickier than you think it is. But it makes it a lot easier when you have that symmetrical pattern. Because if you make this whole part and one side is a different curve than the other, your eye picks it up right away. It's amazing how quick you pick that up. So we got the rubber in a little bit oversized. Now it's going to be a question of, now this is the part that takes time. This part has to bend around the front. So I've got to interpolate. I've got to look at it, eyeball it, go shave a little bit off, go over to the drill press or the belt sander, sand a little bit on, cut a little bit off with a knife, no matter how you do it. And taping it in place, no matter how you do it, it seems to help, because if the part moves around, you never can get that side straight, the second side. The one side will be straight, and the part moves, and then the other side is not straight. Now, a job like this, again, it looks so easy. There's the little Harbor Freight grinding thing that goes in a drill press. That allows you to get a nice edge. And, of course, at the end, we radius. The part that sits on the top, we put a smooth edge on it. That does a really, really nice job, in fact. And, again, it's a Harbor Freight tool, a little mandrel you can put in a drill press. It's good for a lot of other things beside this, but this closed cell foam, this sands like it's a piece of soft wood. Now I take sticky back sandpaper and put it on a jar. That then becomes a sanding tool, and I can use that to put the final radius around the edge, because the part of this that you're going to see around the edge, I want that to be smooth and I want it to look real nice. I don't want it to have ratty edges and everything. And to be honest, it's a track bike, so maybe some people wouldn't even care about this. But I usually like to work on stuff, even if it's a track bike part or something that doesn't have to look nice. It only usually takes 4 or 5 minutes more to make it really nice. Now the trick is you tape it in place with some 1/8" tape. You look at all the corners and edges, see where it needs to be even adjusted even more, even a little bit more. Yeah, a little more here, a little more there, no matter how you do this. And back and forth. And you have to lay out the outside part by using the rubber as a pattern. And then back mask everything except the part that's going to show when you put the contact cement on. And contact cement, the 3M contact cement, is really a permanent contact cement. It's really not prone to loosen up, that's for sure. But once I get this all back masked off with the tin foil, now that part, that's the only part that's showing, I can hit that with the 3M contact cement. Take the rubber, hit the rubber with the 3M contact cement, the side that's going to face it. And this is a really permanent glue. You get one shot to put this down, and it's flypaper. You probably could get it up to a certain point, but then you'd have to add more glue. So when we put this part on the final install, I was real careful with Glenn that we just didn't get a big wrinkle in it or something. And because Glenn's skill level on doing stuff like putting decals on and stuff is real good. He knows. Now see, we got the glue on there. He knows that this is the job. This is one of the things you got to have 12 hands. You have to be an octopus to do this. Now, if you just don't slut that down, you're not gonna move it at all. So I started with this. I did this. I call it a roll up. If you have a helper, and this is real handy that we have Glenn, and a real helper, or maybe it's handy that he has me. I don't know. Anyway, and make sure you're inside the dotted lines, inside that tape line, and that is such a good trick. Oh, that works to perfection. And now, once that contact cement, you can take that out in the sun or do what I'm doing, roll it down. That's pretty much permanently mounted on there. And to get that off, if you decide you want to get it off, you really have a heat gun or a hair dryer, or it comes up in pieces. So, and that's the old Yamaha TZs and 250s and 350s. They always had the seats made out of closed cell foam. That seat, the way that played out, that was bringing back a lot of good memories for me of the race bikes I had. All had seats like that, and they were plenty uncomfortable. Now, this is to get the edge real nice. You want to protect the fresh paint with some tape, and then using a pointy block. I can get right down in there and do all my fine tuning, make it a little prettier than it normally would be, and just make it to the best of my ability. Now, even though that's a track bike, I think that part just came out really cool. And that really, the seams actually worked out great. When I was all done with this, I was pretty impressed. Glenn did most of the work, and I think it came out just about as good as you could ever expect. Even if that were a street bike and you had an iron butt, well, you could slap a taillight on that and make a street bike out of it. I don't know, but I know that part and this little project, this was one of the ones, and all the time Glenn worked in the shop here, and we did things together with Najat and Turbo Steve, everybody in the A-Team. We had so many people in the A-Team back then that this place was like a factory. Well, those days are gone, but we have some great memories. Anyway, this is a little synopsis of how this played out, and you look back at it and you think, wow, over the course of time we did this, we turned a part that was pretty much recycled it back into where you probably could put that on and nobody would even know it was ever damaged. And that pattern making thing is excellent technology. So I think, I hope you picked up some good information off the video. I try to post something up almost every day on my channel. I try to post useful information, stuff that makes motorcycling fun, and I try to share the passion I have for all motorcycles and restorations, and even riding bikes like my brand new MT-09. They're all great.